Is there no hope for redemption? The answer, sadly, is clear.
Hello and welcome to another review video. Sorry that this video is later than I would have liked to publish. It turns out I started New Game Plus months ago, forget about it, and now I'm sadly nowhere near being able to play the new Elden Ring DLC. It was also very gracious of Kongho to not give us Gundam, because that review video would have taken me way more time and eat more into my Elden Ring playtime. Anyway, this time around I'll be looking at the returning collab, My Hero Academia. This is a 6-tone REM that doesn't have much to offer. There are a few decent units here, but you'll have to do a lot of rolls to get them. Or as it's usually the case, skip the REM and buy the bundle units. This collab also has a 15-for-1 exchangeable unit that also happens to be the batch unit. In general, it seems that batch units are exchangeable and purchasable, so you could buy this unit instead, but I don't see why you would. The unit itself is very lackluster, and the batch isn't that good, since you'll be required to have a bunch of My Hero units in your team to make it worthwhile. So overall, this isn't the best collab to roll in, unless of course you see specific uses for some of these units. There's a grand total of 31 units, and most of them are bad. This mainly goes for the old units, who even after being buffed, still remain pretty weak. So let me begin with the speed round, and look at the most of the old units. Denki and Red Riot do not stand out at all, but at least Red Riot can be used as a skill boost stick with his possible 11 skill boosts. Interestingly enough, I did see Red Riot being used in a really fast SN2 clear, so on the off chance we get slime and you have a single Red Riot that you're debating exchanging away, maybe rethink that and keep him around just in case. For now, Tenya is very underwhelming damage-wise, but after the damage and Garbage Awakening buffs, he'll have a decent enough multiplier. His double L and 2 skill pen resist might bring some much needed utility, but unfortunately, his active has a long cooldown and is pretty useless most of the time. Frope is more of a mess, as she doesn't do much damage or provide much utility. Her active skill is easily replaceable with better ones, as she can only tackle RCB and time debuffs, and low cooldown rebuffers like Blue Balden are stronger and more accessible. Momo seems like she could work well in a Tengen team, but her Orb Changer active skill is not needed at all. At best, she might be good for some random ranking team with that low cooldown active skill, her skill boost, and her red and light takoyakis. Aizawa has a pretty decent amount of utility and a pretty decent active skill, though this one is a bit long. Generally, Void Attribute and Damage Absorption active skills are on a 7-turn cooldown, but due to this one having a delay and a 7x6 board effect, the cooldown needs to be raised. I don't exactly hate him, but his base transformation active skill is on a pretty low cooldown, which can be easily overcharged at the beginning of a dungeon, and it's a delay, which might be mostly useless at the beginning of a dungeon too. Aizawa kinda reminds me of Hisoka, since they have a similar enough active, and at least with Hisoka, you're able to put an equip on him that has an active skill of your choosing. His equip is also decent with 2 full resist and 1 team HP. The equip's active skill does leave a lot to be desired, but it's not that bad awakening wise. So even though Aizawa is pretty solid, I would still probably go with other units or other equips with better active skills. Even after the Garbage Awakening buff, Ochako does a laughable amount of damage. While she has a few utility awakenings, note that she doesn't have any skill boost on her base awakenings. Also, her active is all over the place. It might have been somewhat okay if she also voided damage absorption, but she does not. Her equip is not the worst, and if you're lucky, you could get a Skyfall match and get 1 effective skill boost. Himiko is a bit interesting due to her transformation active being on a 3-turn cooldown. And post-transformation, she has a pretty high damage multiplier, but her active skill is a bit iffy. It's a 7-turn cooldown active skill with a 1-turn haste, but those effects are a bit lackluster. The main effect is a Pierce active, and 2 Pierce turns on a 7-turn cooldown is not that special. If you run her along with other units that also have a 7-turn cooldown and a 1-turn haste, you could have her Pierce effect up half the time. So I guess there's that. I honestly don't think that's enough a justification to build a team around that gimmick. Base Deku could do a decent amount of damage in wood BDP teams, but he'll still struggle, and those type of teams aren't that popular right now. There are Desi and I guess Academy Nihilus teams, but there's not much of a need for him there, since you wouldn't really bring him along for his active skill. Interestingly enough, he has 5.2 effective HP, but that alone doesn't carry him over the finish line. His Evo could have a higher damage multiplier than the transform version if you go for the 10C plus awakening, but his active skill is still pretty lackluster. He doesn't generate enough to make a PDP, so you'll have to rely on other orb changers. There's much better units out there that generate more green orbs on the same cooldown. Graces is a prime example if you also need dark orbs. At the very least, he does have a lot of utility and can also serve as a 7x6 base. Base Todoroki is pretty weak, and there's not really a home for him in blue PvP teams. His equip is a bit interesting due to the amount of auto heal turns, but I don't see much application for this unless you really need that cleric effect as well. The auto heal awakenings are useless nowadays since a lot of teams want a mix of damage reduction and HP multipliers, and the latter make the auto heal awakenings much less impactful. The Evo version does about the same damage, but has a slightly better active since it tackles both attribute and damage absorption shields. The 3-turn duration is probably unnecessary since spawns with these type of shields are usually spread apart, or you only need this type of active only once during a dungeon, like in UN6. Bakugo's active does a bunch of things, but the most useful effect is the 2-turn pierce on a 4-turn cooldown. It's unfortunate that he can't fully take advantage of his decent damage multiplier and his third attribute, since he has no damage cap breaking active. At least he's got some utility with his double Ls and I guess his fire OEs. His Evo might not be all that bad in a Lyle team, since this one has a 7x6 leader skill and has a very useful active. Bakugo's new Evo isn't as useful, while he can pump out more damage with his active skill cell buff, damage cap break, and third attribute, the orb enhance and orb changing effect aren't that valuable. Shigaraki doesn't exactly stand out unless you're constantly using his active skill and facing off against attackers or machines. His Evo is mediocre too, as it doesn't do much damage, and there are better units out there to deal with assist removal recovery and void attribute and damage absorptions. At first, he looks like he could work with his new BGM version, but those teams usually opt in to bring units like UP for more damage output. Mike could be using a like brick farming team, but the transformation step slows you down since the base active doesn't really do much to speed up farming, and post transformation he doesn't even generate at least 12 light orbs. Endeavor doesn't do much damage, and his active skill is pretty useless too. His Evo usually sees more use, as it isn't that bad for red brick farming teams, but there are a bunch of red brick units nowadays, so Endeavor doesn't exactly stand out unless you really need those 3 combo orbs, but again, you usually don't want these as they really slow you down. Transforming All Might has a looping cap break active skill for your subs if you match 5 attributes every turn, and it also provides a nice attack buff to himself and to attackers. And while his leader skill has a nice 5 effective HP multiplier, this is dependent on you having attacker type subs. There are plenty of attack type equips, so that can be remedied, but there are better rainbow leaders out there who aren't as restrictive, or in the case of Akasa, who also restricts to a certain type, but has a way bigger pool of strong rainbow devil type subs, like Bartending Batty and Raffin Kitty. And additionally, Akasa also runs a much needed RCP boost to deal with thorns or super altitude dungeons. The only team right now that consistently brings you down below 20% HP is Gokrex, so realistically that's where you could use All Might's Evo. But he's off color, so he won't be able to deal any damage. Even though he doesn't tackle attribute absorption void, Kaishu's Evo is a way better option, since he also helps in orb generation for Gokrex teams. All for One has a pretty high damage multiplier, but dark PvP teams have no shortage of good subs and leaders. He doesn't really bring much to the table, his active skill Spike can be easily covered by other units, and his orb changing effect is very unreliable. Other than the transforming active skill effect, he won't be able to damage cap break, so his damage output will be severely limited in endgame dungeons, which tend to be tediously long and usually have enemies with high defense. It's interesting that you can add 2 types, but that's all there is to it, as the active skill and the other awakenings aren't all that good. Base Dabi and his new Evo have pretty low damage multipliers to justify using them. At least the base has a bit more damage in red PvP teams and slightly more utility, but that's not saying much. His equip is somewhat more passable, only for the bulk awakenings. The Jammer blessing is not something every team can take advantage of, maybe aggregate, but nowadays we get 10C equips that do more damage and bring more utility to the table. Base Twice and his new Evo have interesting active skills that can fix your HP and counter a handful of debuffs. He can also work as an unmatchable recovery unit with his TPAs, but I do struggle to see where to use him. Color-wise, he could work in Bartending Toka and Taki teams, and also Desi teams, but it will be awkward to force him in, especially if you have copies of those other units. His new Evo is sort of a replacement for a Desi, as he can generate the same colors, but the Jammer creation could really screw you over. Jiro has 2 Break Awakenings, so she could be used for farming non-super gravity dungeons, but you hopefully have a handful of other teams for that. Her active skill doesn't even generate orbs, so you'll have to rely on 3 or 4 other units to generate those swipeable boards for quick farming. The only use for her will probably be as a leader for New Year Norris teams in the My Hero Academia Colosseum. Her equip is a bit interesting, as it has a lot of move time, has a single team HP, makes a unit unbindable, and has a haste. It's not all bad, but it's not exactly all that good either. Mr. Compress has a lot of utility awakenings, but his active skill is a bit weird. This is a 7-turn cooldown active skill that has a 1-turn haste, so you could create some interesting loops with other units with those active skill characteristics. The delay and 3 turns of attribute absorption void are a bit too niche though, so I don't see much value in him, especially because his equip is pretty bad too. Hitoshi is an old orb skin unit. Even after Kaishu's buff and the introduction of Satsuki and Kana, you won't be able to get much out of Hitoshi. I mean, you could use him as a leader for a light dark TPA team since he has 5 effective HP, which is more than those 2 other units that usually get paired. He can dish out up to 15 billion damage, but to get his full damage potential, you'll need to make TPAs and boxes, which is pretty unrealistic. He's also not a dependable orb changer due to, well, being an orb changer instead of an orb spawner. He does have a quick awoken bind clear active skill, but no unmatchable recovery. He could deal with that debuff with the unmatchable recovery latent, but that severely limits your damage output and slows down your team. Nighteye is a solid cleric if you're able to deal with Lock Orb Skyfall, which honestly any modern team should be able to do. His damage is lacking, but at least he has a decent amount of utility with his skill boost and Ls. He does like the usual heal TPAs that clerics have, so be wary of that. His equip is really solid as it gives you a 7C plus and 2 team HPs. The other equips with at least these awakenings are either BGM units or GFEs, so this one's pretty solid in comparison. Obviously not as good, but since Nighteye is a low rarity, you might be lucky enough to get one from the stamp rolls or the dungeon clear rewards. Hawks is pretty solid for green teams, but those have always been kinda weak. He has a really high damage multiplier and can fully take advantage of that with his damage cap break active and third attribute. With 2 of them, you can make an orb generation system, but you'll still need a spinner or another orb changer to get more green orbs in your board since he doesn't make enough to make a box, and hopefully some other green combo to take advantage of those green takoyaki awakenings. I have seen him being used from time to time in JP alongside this unit from Slime. Even though Hawks has a higher damage multiplier and damage output potential, I think this slime leader usually uses Melorum, who offers more utility. Also, I think this team usually uses Hulk, who is actually a damage dealer and can generate 6 green orbs on a 1-turn cooldown. Unfortunately, in NA, we missed out on the last Marvel rerun, and therefore on also these buffs to older Marvel units. So overall, while Hawks is a really strong damage dealer, he won't see as much use as he did in JP, and honestly I don't think he saw that much, because again, Melorum and Hulk work pretty well without him. Lady Nagant looks like a solid leader with 5 effective HP and a lot of bonus combos, but unfortunately for her, she's kinda competing against Goten, who has a way higher damage multiplier and a third dark sub-attribute. Her pre- and post-transformation active skills are also not that useful. The former has a high cooldown with no effective skill boost, and the latter only handles damage absorption, so you'll have to bring along a different sub to counter attribute absorption, or maybe use the attribute absorption latent, which further restricts your team building and forces you to match at least a non-dark match. I don't think she'll see much use as a sub or a leader. Her equip on the other hand is really great. It's sort of a downgrade from Goten's equip, but if you only have one Goten of your own, this is pretty much the next best thing. The active skill is not as appealing since it doesn't grant you any more effective skill boosts, but these effects could come in handy early in a dungeon like in UN6, or like I said, just put this on a transforming unit like Goten who needs to change their sub-attribute to dark and do more damage. Next is Best Jeanist. He's a TPA's base leader that has a really high damage multiplier, but Best Jeanist is short of the best. While he can output a lot of damage, the lack of a third attribute severely limits him to only do up to 16 billion damage every 3 turns. Another big shortcoming is the active skill. While it does give an interesting board, the fact that it doesn't pierce damage voids will severely limit your team since you'll ideally have 3 Jeanists to system, and then you will need to bring along a dedicated piercer. Teams with 3 or more orb generators like Muichiro and Gregory match boxes to deal with void shields. Other teams like Bitoka and Daki have important secondary effects in their active skills, like shields, to free up other team slots. With Best Jeanist, you'll have 3 other free slots where you will most likely need a piercer, a cleric, an attribute and damage absorption voider, and quite possibly a looping shield. It will be challenging to find units that have those effects, plus other secondary effects to counter other common gimmicks, like board shrinks and stat debuffs. Also, he doesn't really have a good partner, since water and light TPAs are a weird combination. combination. We are also missing some other strong blue and light units, like the marbles, who have an active skill that condenses, pierce, and damage absorption effects. And if we had that unit, you could just run attribute absorption latents on your best Jeanist to counter that mechanic. His equip has 7 effective skill boosts, but delays aren't as good since dungeons like UN6 and SN1 have enemies with starter shields on the first floor. And speaking of SN1, the boss, who happens to be somewhat farmable, has an equip with 8 effective skill boosts. So if for some reason you want best Jeanist for the equip, maybe get farming and save your stones. Tokoyami is another 3-unit system, but he's more flexible than Jeanist since he's a BDP unit and he generates swipeable boxes. He's mainly used to farm some of the early UN dungeons. Most notably, he can do some pretty speedy clears of UN3, but just like Jeanist, he's a mid-rarity unit, so you'll have to roll a punch to get multiple copies, at least 2 of your own if you somehow find a friend who'll decide to run him too. There is also an easy system replacement for copies of Tokoyami, and if you bother to max skill a few of these, you've probably been farming UN3 with him to begin with. With Katana Devil, you'll be forced to actually match boxes, so Tokoyami is definitely an upgrade in that sense. Obviously, Tokoyami does way more damage and has a higher damage cap, but I still feel like the upgrade is only marginal, so I don't see much of an incentive going after multiple copies of this unit. Essentially, it comes down to how you feel about speed farming. His equip could make a 1-turn cooldown unit into a looping roulette and time buffer, but 10 turns is pretty long, and those effects can easily be interrupted by enemies. Still, the equip's awakenings are still pretty solid. For some reason, this unit and the new BGM Deku were buffed in JP to celebrate My Hero Academia arriving in NA, and luckily for NA we got the buffs ASAP instead of 2 months down the line. This unit got slightly better, but it still doesn't cut it in my opinion. They got buffed to have a 3rd attribute, the active skill battle restriction was changed from 5 to 3 battles, and they also got a heal L and a hard column awakenings. This unit didn't see much use on release, and still probably won't. While it is a non-transforming unit with a beefy 78% reduction leader skill, is capable of dealing up to 24 billion damage, has an easy activation and combo scaling leader skill, and is accessible since you can exchange for one with 15 My Hero Academia units. There is some tough competition from this slime unit, who people usually choose to pair with Deku All Might's best pairing, Mirko. Ramirez is also an exchangeable unit, but not as accessible since she takes 7-star GFEs and only a few selected slime units as straight fodder. Even if we don't get the slime collab, I still wouldn't get Deku All Might to play with Mirko, since I don't think he brings that much to the table. Their damage multiplier is still on the low side, and I wish that his active skill did something other than pierce, since if you're running a rainbow team, you could just run the pierce latent and never mind about running a pierce unit. Deku and All Might are not that bad, especially if you're new to rainbow teams, but I would still advise against chasing him or rolling in the machine to get enough stray fodder. The equip is somewhat interesting due to the 99 turn damage cap break effect, but this is pretty easy to disrupt, and if SN2 is any indication, enemies who constantly change their damage cap break will be way more commonplace. Mirio is a pretty solid rainbow sub who post-transformation gives you 100% damage and attribute absorption voids, a cell spike, and an attack buff that might help counter big attack debuffs. He's somewhat similar to New Year Reach with his absorption void active skill, possible double Ls, and skill charge awakenings. Unfortunately, Mirio's personal damage multiplier is pretty low, but he's most commonly used in Adele teams, and that doesn't matter there, because Adele's insane leader skill multiplier even allows Mirio to damage cap on his 3rd sub-attribute. His 4 skill charge awakenings also allows you to overcharge him easily. For example, he was mainly used in UN6 to carry a gravity that then allows you to one-shot the boss. But outside of Adele teams, he might not see much use, especially for the near future. There are better and easier rainbow or rainbow-ish leaders coming up soon, like the aforementioned Ramirez, and I haven't seen Miriam have any relevance in those. And again, one of those leaders is Mirko, who can output a great amount of damage even without a 3rd sub-attribute, since her guard break awakening and 8 billion damage cap break is more than enough. Her leader skill has follow-up attack and bonus combos, so she can pair with pretty much any other leader. Again, in JP currently, she's mostly paired with Ramirez, which again we might not get, so Mirko might not see much use in future dungeons without this unit, especially for SN2. Other than Ramirez, Mirko pairs well with Deku and All Might, or even herself, though the latter option is less flexible, as you would rather run her with a 7x6 board, and to run a double Mirko team, you'll need to run a lead swapper like Fasca or Poof. Ideally, you do want 2 copies of her in a team, so you can constantly cycle her time buff and cap breaking active skill. Her equip is really great, as it is a 4-turn skill charge with the skill boost awakening, and it also grants you a little bit more move time. The skillbind resist awakening is pretty nice too, as some teams struggle to hit the 100% resistance. Shigaraki is yet another 3-unit system from this machine. He's almost a swipeable leader, since on floors with no void damage shields, you can just use his active skill, swipe away, and effortlessly make 10 combos. His active skill also gives an auto heal effect, which saves you the trouble of including a dedicated sub like Aki or Misaka teams. Even though Shigaraki is pretty strong and can clear all dungeons in NA right now, he quickly fell out of fashion in JP and currently doesn't see much use from what I can tell. I have yet to see him being used for an SN2 clear. I mostly just see him being used to speed farm UN4. At 1%, he's a very expensive system to chase, and there isn't much of an upside to roll in this machine since all other My Hero units are pretty lackluster. So just like with Tokoyami, it depends whether you really want a team to farm UN dungeons. His equip is the first Fortune Haste with a 10C Awakening, but the rest of the awakenings are pretty useless. Auto heal awakenings are meaningless in the current meta, and so is the core. The equip is supposed to be used on his own teams so that you may be able to heal more, but nowadays you want a leader skill HP buff to handle raw HP checks, and large HP numbers render auto heal awakenings as less effective. I would definitely save my stones and money. There isn't much to gain from chasing Shigaraki to build a farming team. If you care about farming, I would save my stones and money for the then Genki Bunko rerun to chase or buy the 1% unit there, Misaka, who got buff and is able to swipe SN1. The new BGM Deku is a really strong green leader. Right off the bat, he works really well with Desi to tackle UN6 and SN1. He only got a somewhat minor buff that changed his damage cap break from 7 billion to 9 billion. This is somewhat relevant because non-rainbow units need higher damage cap breaks to deal with high defense enemies. If you have Desi, there isn't much of a need to pull or buy Deku, as Desi leader swaps on transformation and you'll replace your Deku as a leader. So I would save all my stones and money and try to find a Deku friend. If we happen to get Slime, Deku can work really well with this unit to tackle SN2. This unit is exchangeable. You could exchange your own copies and pair with the friend Deku again. The only reason why I would want my own Deku would be for self-pairing, because very rarely do I see Deku being used as a sub. Or I guess you could use him for his equip, as he has a nice mix of damage and utility awakenings, and the active skill gives you 2 effective skill boosts. So to recap, this collab is pretty underwhelming. With a very small amount of units I would consider good. In the case of Shigaraki, the investment for a system will be pretty high, with not much of an upside. And in the case of BGM Deku and Mirko, they might not see much use without slime units in the near future. Don't get me wrong, these 3 are very capable leaders, but rolling in My Hero will lead to a lot of disappointing gold eggs. There's a slim chance that NA will get slime, and there are 2 meta leaders in this collab that require a bunch of dupes, and therefore require a lot of pulling. So I would rather save stones and roll there, because even if you don't make it out of slime, with a full Mirio team, some of the other units there are pretty solid. The Dengeki Bunko collab will also return, and there are some pretty strong leaders there too. Luckily, some of these are pretty accessible, since they are exchangeable for other Dengeki units, 7-star GFEs, or both. I would say save yourself the headache. I did a multi-pull, and even though I pulled the new Deku and All Might unit, I felt nothing but disappointment. I'll just get back to Elden Ring, where I'm trying to play as Kurotobi, and I don't know why he looks like Michael Jackson with big anime eyes. I try my best with the character creator. Alright, I'll see you guys next time.